We are here this morning for managing COVID fatigue. Set yourself up for a better 2021. And it's going to be a conversation facilitated by my friend Tony Hawk, who I've known for a long time back in my Walmart days. I think I met Tony back in 2000. I was mentioning before, he and I had a great conversation that was life-changing for me when he was with an organization called Resources for Living. And then he and Adam work together. Adam's based out in Colorado. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but just a couple of things quickly. First of all, welcome to our Connect members. Again, if you're a Connect member, you've got an all access pass to every one of our events, not only live, but to the video recordings after the fact. So if you've got to miss any part of this, you'll be able to go back in and watch the video later. We were talking before the event started, because of the importance of this topic, we may end up just opening this up to everybody. I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to hear this message and have access to Tony and to Adam for help if they need it. So just maybe a heads up on that. And then the second thing I would say is, if you're not familiar with Zoom as a webinar platform, there's a Q&A tab that you can click on, and you can ask them questions as we go. No one's going to be live on camera, on mic, so you don't have to worry about being called out. But if you do have questions, I would encourage you to submit them as we go. And I'm not sure if they're going to take those questions as they go or hold them to the end, but whatever their style, we'll make sure we get as many questions answered as we possibly can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony and Adam. Thank you both so much for being here with us this morning, and certainly for the time you've put into preparing for this group.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with you and with the folks that on your Connect group. Adam and I have been working together since about 2002, I believe it is. And Adam is in Denver, Colorado with his wife and his daughter. Let me let Adam tell you a little bit about himself, and I'll come back and give you a little bit about my background as well. Adam?
Sure. Thanks, Tony and Matt. Yeah, I'm in just outside of Denver. My wife and daughter are here. I work with leaders and teams across the country on just, developing themselves as leaders and executive coaching, and then with strategic planning, team development, and all sorts of space in there. So it's been an interesting year for that, and really enjoyed helping leaders and the teams that I work with navigate a very strange 2020 and what is kicking off to an interesting 2021 as well. So looking forward to visiting with you today.
Thanks. We serve a lot of clients, including folks at Walmart and other retailers. You know, I've been working around Walmart since 1992. Having lived here in Bentonville in 91, moved away from here to serve Walmart, and as many of you understand, the supplier role. And then went to work with Don Soderquist after my work with serving directly with Walmart as a consultant. Went to work with Don Soderquist at the Soderquist Center for Leadership and Ethics. Adam was also there at the Soderquist Center, working there for a couple of years as well. And have since then held executive roles in the technology industry, healthcare industry, and in manufacturing. Like Adam, we hold several coaching certifications and counseling certifications as well. Matt asked us to talk about the issue of COVID fatigue. And when he asked us to talk about that, I was a little concerned about just bringing up the subject and asking people to listen to another webinar about COVID. You know, I kind of thought, well, that might be the worst idea ever. If your inbox is anything like mine, you've been inundated with all things COVID over the last year, and you may well be a little bit kind of sick of it. The fact is that you signed up for this actual webinar tells me that you're looking for something that's a little bit unique, and it might be a little bit different, that might provide something that's a little bit more helpful and more hopeful for you. I saw a quote the other day that I can't accurately attribute it, but Adam will put it up here on the slide, but I love it because it resonated with me. And it's the second, there it goes. It says, emotionally speaking, 2020 lasted 12 months, approximately 12 months and 487 years. And I kind of laughed when I read that. I thought, yeah, that's about right. It lasted that long, and it just feels like it's continuing on. So take just a moment, though, and just kind of recall why it lasted and has lasted like it has. I'll go to that next slide, and we'll just kind of walk through this stuff as it pops up on the screen. It's all things 2020. I mean, we had COVID, we had unrest in the in our society. We had a really unusual election period, and we also had murder hornets. Who ever heard of those, 2-inch hornets? But a lot of things changed over the last several months. Scott Pritchard said, 2020 came on us like a uninvited distant relative that we've been warned not to let into the house. And somehow there they are, they're drinking your best wine, they're taking over the remote, and you don't even know how to get rid of them. And you don't know how they got in. I mean, they're just sitting there. It just kind of showed up on us. So it feels like in many ways that 2020 just sort of happened to us. I'm not sure 2021 is off to a much better start, as Adam said a while ago. January 7th, right after the unrest in Washington, D.C., many of you saw a post that said, "Today concluded my 7-day free trial, and I think I'd like to cancel my subscription." A news survey that I just read this morning in this morning's news of 12,000 people were surveyed. 72% of those 12,000 said 2020 was probably their most stressful year ever for a lot of different reasons. Some are working harder than they've ever had before, and some are just completely out of work because they don't have work. And so, the experiences vary. People's experience of this is really quite unusual. Some have experienced, and you maybe think about how you've experienced, but I'm thinking of all the emotions people experienced in 2021. Fear. Some people are in a state of fear that they're going to contract this disease and become ill. Others now, because of the isolation, are experiencing extreme loneliness. You can't even go out and give somebody, a friend, a hug, when you greet them anymore. It feels that way anyway. Some are going through various stages of grief, just the grief itself, the loss of connection, the loss of relationships, the loss of normality, whatever that happened to be for you. Some have become pretty angry. Others have become ambivalent. Others just carrying a low level frustration that they don't seem to be able to know how to shake. And others have carried that on into a level of depression, just feeling completely overwhelmed for a lot of different reasons. And now I'm going to tell you about one of his friends, overwhelmed for, you think, be a good reason, but again, it's a different kind of reason. Some are stressed. Some of that stress is carried over into what we would call burnout, where the demand is high. Your control over the demand is out of your control, it's low, and you're not feeling the support. So when you put those three things together, demand, control, and support, when those things are out of kilter, you can easily experience stress and up to the point of burnout. And burnout is that anxiety that you feel that you just can't seem to get rid of. You don't want to get on the phone. You don't want to hear another call. You don't want to listen or look to and see another email. That's, you have a revulsion to those kind of things. That's experiencing stress to the max, which turns to burnout. Some are, on the other hand, experiencing a kind of a sense of reprieve. They're at home for the first time. They're able to be off the road because you can't travel, so they're not road warriors anymore. I've experienced the road warrior experience, and I'm glad to be off the road to some degree. Some are using this time to reconnect with family, which is a good thing. Some, on the other hand, are getting a little tired of family. They've been around them a little bit too much. Some are also just connecting and reconnecting with old hobbies or building new hobbies. I noticed that the hunting and fishing license sales in the country have just soared this last year. People are stepping out and doing some things they haven't done before. It was RV sales and camping kind of things people are doing outdoors so they can kind of get away from the congestion. Those products have started selling even more so. And it seems like there's just also been a loss of boundaries between work and home, as many people are experiencing. Having to work at home with their family and their kids is a unique situation. Let's take a look at some of the Pew Research and what this kind of tells us a little bit what others are experiencing as a result of this. So 64% of those working from home are doing so simply because they don't have a choice. Their workplace is closed. They have to stay home and work. On the other hand, 54% of that group of people say they want to continue working from home after this is over. Now, whether or not that's possible will be between you and your organization. There's a whole lot of implications around that request to work from home. 39% of those working from home, working mothers, they find working from home actually even more difficult because of the blending and the confusion of roles. 65% of those who work from home feel less connected. These kind of seminars that we're on Zoom, it seems like we don't get to, we can't just walk in down the hall from us and grab a cup of coffee with someone or see someone in a break for lunch and go out quickly for a bite to eat. Those things are just, we've kind of lost that. So that loss of connection is pretty strong, which also leads to that isolation and loneliness. Then other group of people are having difficulty staying motivated. And I understand from the research that said the younger group of people are having more difficulty staying motivated than the older group. 32% of this group are say the greatest challenge is working without interruptions. 50% of the parents with children at home are finding that more difficult to work without interruptions. And you can imagine why that's the case. People are now working from home, but they didn't build their homes designed to work from home necessarily. Not everyone has an office at home. I'm fortunate to be able to have that. And if you have two parents working from home, you have two people trying to work from home, you may not have two offices. And then you have, kids running around trying to go to school and I'm experiencing that now. My wife is taking care of our grandkids while our daughter's at work and the kids are here at the house doing virtual schooling. I thought schooling was 8 hours a day. It turns out that schooling is about 3 hours a day. And there's a whole lot of breaks in between, which I'm finding very interesting that the kids have so much free time. I keep wondering, what did they do with all that free time when they were at school? Not too sure what the answer to that is, but she stays pretty busy with them. So you never can tell. One of them might walk through this door behind me and say, hello, Papa, in a few minutes. So, we have interruptions like that come along. Others are experiencing this thing we've come to call Zoom fatigue. It seems like all of our interactions are just transactional interactions. The relational interactions seem to be a bit of a loss. And we can't go out to eat sometime. We can't go to church, not like we used to anyway. And so we've lost a lot of the things that have given us the ability to interact. And then others kind of like me, I'm just frustrated that I didn't buy the NASDAQ in late March. That's not part of the Pew Research, by the way. That's just me looking at the NASDAQ going, wow, what a great time that would have been. But most of my investment is hindsight vision. So I haven't always done so good in that area. So the question really is, with all this going on and all of 2020 having happened to us, what do we do? And that's kind of that next slide that comes up is actually answering that question. I kind of want to take the route of that pre-flight announcement where the flight attendant comes on and talks to you about safety and said, when that oxygen mask drops down, you put your oxygen mask on first, because if you're not taking care of yourself well, you're going to find it difficult to be able to do your job, and then also to lead and take care of the people that you're trying to lead, and to be an encouragement to your own family. So it really becomes critical that you take care of yourself. So step number one to that, I'm going to suggest would be improve your emotional intelligence. By understanding just a little bit more about emotions, we talk about emotional intelligence. One is self-awareness, that's emotional awareness. Number two is self-management. Once you understand your emotions, and how do you better manage those? Well, the first thing to understanding your emotions is realize how powerful your emotions really are. Your positive emotions can produce dopamine and all sorts of mood enhancing hormones. You get out and you do some things that are fun, they get exciting. They can produce their stress hormones, but they're not negative stress hormones. There's negative emotions, though, that can produce the same type of hormones or even different type of hormones that are designed to prepare you for fight or flight. Cortisol, aldosterone, cholesterol, testosterone, those kind of things. They're not so bad in the short run, but they certainly can be damaging to your health and your well-being in the long run. Now, I do understand there is an optimal stress, and I do a whole seminar on optimal stress that actually can help you be energetic and effective. Stress-free life is probably not a very exciting life. But then there's this chronic stress that results in health problems, things like heart disease and cancers and ulcers and migraines and tension headaches and backaches and things that can exacerbate problems with arthritis and diabetes. there's a real fine line between that optimal stress and that chronic stress. The same hormones are going on, they're working to prepare you for action. But we have this slow underlying chronic stress that sometimes is just eating at us, and this year has not made that any easier. So recognize that the emotions and how you have those and deal with them can end up having an impact on your well-being. The second thing to do is recognize that your emotions are in your control, that they are the result of your own self-talk. I have a philosophy that I've sort of done a lot of coaching by. It says, I learn to believe what I hear myself say. That's an absolute psychological truth. People learn to believe what they hear themselves say. I'm going to illustrate that with a couple of stories and let you kind of experience it. So I want you to measure your emotions as I read you these facts about a guy named Terry. Okay. So fact number one, listen and pay close attention to how you're feeling. Fact number one, Terry failed to appear at the hospital for his wife's delivery of their first child. Terry's wife was devastated. How do you feel about Terry? Fact number two, Terry was involved in a serious automobile accident on his way to the hospital. How do you feel about Terry now? Fact number three, Terry's accident was a result of a drug overdose. Now how do you feel about Terry? Terry has suffered from, this is fact number four, Terry has suffered from attacks of debilitating arthritis. He took the drugs to reduce the pain so he could drive to the hospital. Okay, different perspective. Next fact. Terry had chosen to go away for a weekend to spend time with a friend, not knowing or knowing full well that his wife would deliver at any time. When he left to be with his friend, he had no arthritis pain. Now, how do you feel about Terry? In fact, the last fact here I want to share with you, Terry's closest friend in all the world recently lost his business and had entered a deep state of depression. Terry feared that his friend would take his life, and he had literally gone to save his friend's life. And just watch how your emotions change with those different things that are feeding into your perceptions. Your emotions are a result of what you said about each one of those facts, what you said to yourself. Listen to this story, another story about emotions. A man driving home on a remote stretch of highway gets a flat tire. It's a cold winter night. Preparing to change the flat, he realizes he does not have a jack to raise his car. Far in the distance, he sees some lights in a small farmhouse and begins the long walk to borrow a jack. It's getting dark, and as he walks alone, he worries that the people will be reluctant to help him. They'll probably refuse to even answer the door, or worse still, they'll pretend not to be at home. Then I have to walk another mile to get to the next house, and they'll say they don't want to open the door, and they don't have a jack anyway. When I finally get someone to talk to me, they'll want me to convince them I'm not some kind of criminal. And if they do agree to help me, which is doubtful, they'll want to keep my wallet so I don't run off with their stupid jack. What's wrong with these people? Are they so untrusting they can't even help a fellow citizen? Would they have me freeze to death out here in the cold? By this point, he has reached the first farmhouse. Having worked himself up into a virtual stage of rage, he bangs on the front door, thinking to himself, they better not try to pretend they're not at home because I can hear the TV running. A few seconds later, a pleasant woman opens the door and asks with a smile, "Can I help you?" He yells back at her, "I don't want your help, and I wouldn't take your lousy jack if you gift wrapped it for me." Again, self-talk, the power of self-talk and what it can do for you, to you, can cause you to go into a state of rage and just based on your own self-talk. So the second challenge there was recognize your emotions are the result of your self-talk. And then finally, recognize that you are in charge of your self-talk. That no one else can make you happy, no one can make you mad, no one can make you depressed, no one can make you happy. They can do things that you respond to internally and that you respond to quickly or quietly, that you say to yourself, you respond to yourself, and those things you say to yourself result in your emotions. I remember a story of a lady who gave, when Matt mentioned this company called Resources for Living, gave Resources for Living a call. And when she got on the phone, she was incredibly upset. She was to the point of suicide. And I got to talk and trying to get her to talk. After several minutes of kind of nonstop crying, she finally stopped to tell me what was going on. And she told me, she said, "My mom kicked me out of my house." I thought, wow, that's pretty tough. I said, "How old are you?" And she had just turned, just past 18. summer after she graduated from high school. I thought, wow. So first thing I wanted to know from her was, do you have some support? Do you have a place you can stay? And she said, yes, I have an aunt I'm staying with. I can stay with her as long as I like. And I thought, well, that's good news. You got a place to stay. Next thing I want to know, can you support yourself? So I asked her about her job, and she actually worked with one of the companies that we serve. And so I thought, well, she's got a good job. And I asked her about her social support. Does she have friends? And she started identifying her friends for all these people she worked with there at the company she served. And I said, well, you told me you just graduated from high school, but you didn't mention any of those friends from high school. Why was that? She said, well, I don't have any friends from high school. I said, that's interesting. She said, all my people that I knew in high school, she said, Tony, I grew up in a really tough part of town, kind of an inner city setting. And most of the people I know there are having babies or on drugs. And she said, I didn't do that. I said, well, what made you not make those choices? She said, well, I ran track in high school. And she said, in order to run track in high school, our coach made us kind of keep things pretty clean and keep our lives clean, keep our grades up and keep our attitudes up. She said, so I was focused on my track. She said, in fact, I still run. She said, I just got back in from a run today. And I said, well, how often do you run? She said, I'll run 3 miles every day. I thought, wow, there's not many people in the world who run 3 miles every single day, but she still does. And I said, do you realize how unusual that is? She said, no, I didn't realize that was a deal at all. She said, in fact, I was so good at track that they've offered me a scholarship to go to college. And I thought, wow, you're going to take them up on that? And she says, well, I hadn't decided yet. And I thought, wow, man, you got an aunt who loves you. You've got a great job. You got a great group of friends. You got a coach who cared about you enough to keep you focused on some really good things. You did really well in that sport to the point that you've got an opportunity to go to college free of charge. Sounds like you got a lot of cool things going for you. And she stopped me. She said, well, wait a minute. This is about 45 minutes into our conversation. It took a while to get all that out of her, by the way. And she said, wait a minute. And she said, I got to go somewhere. And she took off. And I said, well, where are you going? And she came back to the phone a little bit later. She said, well, I had to go get a piece of paper. I said, why? She said, I'm going to write down all the things you told me. And I said, well, you got to realize I didn't tell you anything. She goes, you didn't, did you? You see, her self-talk had told her life was a disaster and not really worth living. But my asking her questions about her life, it caused her to have a different kind of self-talk. There was a lot of alternate self-talk she could choose, but she had chosen to focus on the one thing that was about to destroy her life. 45 minutes into the call, I said, we haven't talked about your mom yet. And she said, oh, I'm going to be okay. We're okay with that. She said, I realize now that I've got to focus on some things differently. So we hung up. 3 weeks later, she called back and I asked her how things are going. She said, oh, things are going great. I said, how are things with you and your mom? She said, not much different, but I'm doing great. And she's doing great because she chose an alternate self-talk. And so the challenge for you, self-talk is so automatic. We don't even examine it. It's so automatic. The real challenge is, how do you identify your self-talk? And then how do you identify alternate self-talk? Things that will lead to a different set of emotions, to explore a different kind of outcome for yourself. 2020 has been tough. And a lot of us have had a lot of different kind of emotions, some positive and some negative. And those negative ones have been incredibly stressful for us. Are there alternate self-talks, alternate things you can say to yourself, alternate ways to think about things that can allow you a little bit different perspective and a little different outcome? Adam's going to take us on a little bit different journey to take a look at this. Adam?
Thanks, Tony. So, Tony took us through the kind of background of how do you manage yourself, how do you get yourself to understand your self-talk and manage your emotions and your state. And I'd like to shift to looking forward to this year and how do we change our pace? 2020 required a lot of adrenaline, a lot of focused adrenaline to get through what we thought might have been short bursts. As it's drug on in 2021, starting out, I'm going to talk about us shifting gears and changing our approaches to lean more on stamina than adrenaline. So this quote here, I think, is a really good one out of an HBR article. Compared to the adrenaline-fueled response in the spring, and the false dawn about the recovery over the summer, the second wave requires a new understanding of personal resilience. And I think it does. I mean, we all got through the first few months on adrenaline. Just we put our heads down, let's do this, let's get to work. And that was different for everybody, right? We all had different situations. Many of us had to pivot at work, solving complex supply chain issues, making big budget cuts, surging demand, plummeting demand, longer hours. Some were facing furloughs. There's fires to put out everywhere. Things were changing all the time. And our personal lives were no different. Maybe that meant we had to tighten our budgets at home, cut some trips, or trips were cut for us, or some of us got to grab takeout and support our favorite restaurants. And we did that for probably 6 weeks straight, twice a week, our two favorite restaurants, go support them. And that 6 weeks turned into what's going to be 10 or 12 months. So we slowed our pace a good bit in that. Or some people kept paying their gym fees just to support their local gym. And for some, it meant, cutting back on all your activities and costs. Some people had kids at home, doing virtual school, hybrid school, variable hybrid school. I have a client their hybrid schedule was different every week. That was a nightmare to manage. For some, they pulled everything out of the stock market. I talked to a guy who did that and he never put it back in, and he's regretting that substantially. And some didn't leave their house for months at all. So that adrenaline, it's a tool to get us through short bursts, and it works really, really well to say, hey, we're going to knock some things out. And it's really powerful to get us through sprints. But what happens when that sprint turns into a marathon? And I think that's what we're all running into now, is that these things we hoped would be just, hey, it's going to be a couple months, let's put our heads down, let's get into it, have turned into a much longer season. And it requires a different approach. And so I use this example. So I'm a runner. I've done about a dozen marathons. I've qualified for Boston, decent marathon runner, not great, not setting world records, but I'm a really slow sprinter. My roommates in grad school, two roommates in grad school, one had run the 400 meter at Baylor. The other was a Division I wide receiver. They were quick, like really, really quick. And they always loved to go take me out to a football field or a track to sprint with me just so they could laugh at me. They thought it was hilarious because they could run it and just wait for me at the other end, whether it was a 100 or a 400. They're about twice as fast as me over that short distance. But eventually I talked them into going on a longer run with me. So just 4 miles, they wanted to do it. And so we took off, and they took off fast, really fast. I had no chance of staying up with them. But about a quarter mile, half mile in, they started slowing. By a mile, they had stopped and they were walking, and I'm just doing my pace. Back then it was a comfortable 6:37 minute mile, and just running past them, and then kept passing. Let's stop. I walked with them for a little bit. They'd pick up, sprint again, run out to a jog, and then have to walk over and over again. We finally got towards our street and got to the stop sign and walked to the stop sign there, and they both want to take off and sprint again just to show that they could still drop me, which they could. Sprinting muscles and endurance muscles are completely different. They require a different approach. And in 2020, our challenge was we all took off sprinting, and then the finish line kept moving. And I think that's what's been a big challenge, is how do we keep running at that pace, not knowing when the end is in sight. What's been interesting this year, I was telling Matt right before the call kicked off here, as 2021 started, within the first week, just calls with clients, I no less than five executives say, hey, I can't do what I did in 2020. I've got to take a different approach. I pushed, I said, hey, I could just get to the end of the year. If I could just get to the end of the year, then I'll make it. And that end of the year came, things are still kind of in place. There's still restrictions. Things are a little bit different depending where you are in the country. But that changed approach is really important. So we started having conversations about what we can do differently. And I think as we look at 2020 and that sprint experience, when you keep sprinting and that finish line keeps getting pushed farther and farther out, eventually running that hard, we start to break, right? And running, that's, if you're running a marathon, you go out too hard, you start to break, you hit the wall, it's called bonking. In work, it's called burnout. So you just go too hard, you lose boundaries, you lose discipline, you lose structure, and your pace starts to fade. I've seen that in a lot of folks, no matter how good or how bad their year was this last year. Tony mentioned, I'd use an example. A neighbor of mine here works at Zoom. He started before they went public. So he's had a pretty incredible year financially. his finances have taken off. The stock was up at some point close to 9 times what it started out at, almost 10. I think 20 for what he got it at. And so phenomenal financial year. At the same time, Zoom went work from home, and they've committed to be home to at least, I think, sometime late 2021. And he's worn out, just doing as best as he's ever done financially, and in his basement all day, every day. It's exhausting. And the urgency and the pace hasn't changed a ton. So when we look at this and think about that change of pace, I think it's important to think about what tools do we need to reset ourselves. Because I think a lot of us have picked up some habits or some paces that probably haven't been super healthy for us in 2020. And as we look at 2021, what can we do to make it better? And so part of that is we think, I think a big part of that is casting a vision, setting goals, and getting direction. This quote's out of a book called 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. And it says, don't underestimate the power of vision and direction. These are irresistible forces able to transform what might appear to be unconquerable obstacles into traversable pathways and expanding opportunities. You need to know where you are going so you can limit the extent of chaos in your life. So when you think about 2021, setting that goal is going to be a huge part of it. What do I want 2021 to look like? How do I tie that to a further vision of where I want to go, so that we have some direction? Because a lot of times in urgent environments, we respond to things that are right in front of us. And they're not necessarily aligned with where we're wanting to go. We're just knocking things out. And once in a while we look up and go, hey, I didn't have the year that I wanted this year. So other couple lines from 12 Rules for Life says, you need to consider the future and think, what might my life look like if I were caring for myself properly? What should I be doing when I have some freedom to improve my health, expand my knowledge, and strengthen my body? To Tony's point on managing emotions, you need to know where you are so you can start to chart your course. So as we think about this, I want to really encourage you to write your story, to set yourself up not only for a better 2021, but for a better plan for longer term. I'll walk through 3 practices to set yourself up for success this year. Some of that's going to be setting aside time for yourself to be able to work on this, clarifying the end goal and working backwards. We'll talk about some planning tools, and then establishing 2 to 3 foundational behaviors that will serve you well through this. So this finding the time one, so there's a couple of things, setting aside time. I remember when I was in my 20s, early 20s, and I'd finished grad school and I was looking for a job. I met with a few business leaders talking about finding jobs and looking at things. They told me it's easier to find a job when you have a job. And I hated that. I hated that advice because I didn't have a job. That was the whole point of meeting with them. I'm going to tell you to set aside time. Like, well, I don't know where to set aside time or how to do it. It's still true. And I know it's frustrating to say it, but finding the time, finding the place, getting creative with it, and getting to work. So you've got to step back and be able to do some work to reset. And first you have to take some time to work on what's important to you. And so when I was talking to a business leader a couple months ago up in Washington State, and they've been really locked down, and he'd spread really, really thin, going really hard through the spring and the summer, had some big life events in late summer and fall, and just hadn't really taken a break. He said, I need a break. We were talking through it, and he goes, well, what am I going to do? Sit at home? Life was mundane, so the option of taking time for him just wasn't very interesting. To take time off to sit at the house and not be able to do all the things he'd normally want to do, not go on vacation or anything like that. So he really struggled with it. We finally talked through it, and he did end up taking it, which was good for him. And he had to get creative with his space. But I think getting creative and finding a place to take the time can be really valuable. My wife and I do this, so we've started using hotel retreats and swapping out. So she gets a day by herself. She's got one coming up this Saturday overnight. So she's got a day away just to mix things up, spend some time working on some things that are important to her. I do the same once in a while. It's not for everybody, but we're both pretty independent and like that space. It's been really good for us. She's a photographer, so she works on editing and some other things there. But we're also used to traveling. I'm used to traveling 2 to 3 weeks a month, and we travel a lot as our hobby. And so we're used to being on the go and things changing quite a bit. So we found a way to put some of that into our world. It also gives us time to get away and focus on some of those other longer term goals. So for some other people, if that's not one of those options, there's this miraculous, like magic part of the day that doesn't have a whole lot going on. It sits somewhere between 4:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. It's called morning. Everyone uses it differently. But I think it's underutilized by a lot of folks, but I just encourage you, if you're not a morning person, I know saying that's really annoying, but there's some hours there. If you need the time, you can't find it, you don't have a place to get creative with, finding whether half an hour or an hour in the morning to create some space to do some of this longer term thought work, so that you can start planning your story and getting that written. Because from there, we're going to talk about, clarifying the end and working backwards. So we do this all the time in business, right? We make annual goals, quarterly goals. What do we need to accomplish this month? I've worked with plenty of leaders doing that, and yet we rarely do it for our lives. And so when we get into this space, clarifying the end, that vision of who we want to become and where we're going, is really the first step in that. What's the end of your story? And I'll talk through a couple of tools as we get into this. But I think it's really important that we get attached to that long-term story. You could do that a couple different ways. One, I think, whether it's writing your obituary, or writing a toast that you would receive at your retirement party, or a celebration of your next promotion. It's something that celebrates the way you live and who you are, that tells your story. How do you want to have lived the next 10, 15, or 25, 30 years, whatever it is? Just a longer term picture of, when I stand up on that day, this is a story that's true about me, right? And make sure when you do, you incorporate a variety of aspects of your life, from your personal life to your professional life, your physical and your spiritual life. What would those look like? What would be true about you? What would be said about you and the way you carried yourself personally, with your family, with your relationships, with your work, with yourself, so that you can kind of paint that picture of where you want to go. And I know right now it can be really difficult to think that far out at times, but I really encourage you to spend some time doing that. And these two tools here may be helpful. So in the strategic planning world, there's an idea called backcasting. And I use it a lot in businesses. And I think it's one, if we apply personally, can be just as valuable. It's painting that picture of the end, of the vision of what I want, beginning with that end in mind, and then working backwards. When we know where we're going and we put plans in place to get there, we know the activity we take today, this week, this month, this quarter, and this year are moving us somewhere. I think it's really important for us to, when we want to focus that motivation, that drive, to tie our daily and regular activities to something, to a direction that we're wanting to go. And so starting to think through that future reality, what might it look like for me at this point in time? And then what are the steps in between? In Gary Keller's book, The One Thing, he talks about knocking over dominoes. And when I talk about painting that big picture, long-term picture, we're talking about your biggest and last domino to fall. What do you want your life to look like, or your career, or a certain accomplishment to look like at that end goal, and then working backwards. He uses some great examples here. A single domino, 1.5-2 inch domino, is capable of knocking over a domino 50% larger than that, right? So it can knock over something almost, half its size larger, 1.5 times its size. There it is. So the first domino is just a couple inches tall. The second one's about 3 inches tall. But the 18th domino, when you use that math, is the height of the Tower of Pisa. The 23rd, the height of the Eiffel Tower. The 51st, Mount Everest. And the 57th reaches the moon. One small activity knocks something over. Momentum, 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 and you work towards that larger goal. So he says the challenge is, in life, not everything lines up and tells us, hey, here's where you should start. That's up to you. As you build your long-term goal, you work back, say, this is the activity I can do today that moves me towards where I want to go. So the key is to set up that first domino for yourself, knowing that it leads to where you're going. When you start with the end in mind and you work backwards and build smaller steps, you can do that for yourself. We do it in business all the time. I encourage you to start looking at doing that in your personal life. So some more examples here and some instruction. We already talked about beginning with the end in mind, taking some time to craft that vision, and then to work backwards to 3 to 5 years from now. If that were to be true for me in 20 years, what's true for me in the nearer term, 3 to 5 years? Where would I be? What would be true about me? Personally, professionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, relationally, what would be true? And then keep working back. What would make for a great 2021? What would I have accomplished this year? What would my goals be? What would I want to start or stop doing? What relationships would I want to strengthen, and what would they look like? what professional development goals do I have for the year? Or what habits have I picked up in COVID that I don't really love? Or the ones that I've lost, right? My gym's been closed for a while, so I don't lift weights like I used to. I ride my bike a lot, but I haven't done that as well. So that's something I want to be working on this year. Have you picked up any bad habits like binge watching Netflix? I know I can raise my hand in that one. Probably watch more of that this year than we ever had. In fact, I didn't have Netflix until COVID hit. So, but from those, identifying your goals of what you want to accomplish this year, and then break them down into smaller and smaller chunks. You've got the long-term vision, the near-term 3 to 5 years. What do I want that picture to look like? What do I want to be true? And then what's the 1-year goal, quarterly goal, monthly, week, and then what can I do today to move that forward? What is something I can move forward today that moves me where I want to be going? Right. So for some, it might be, for example, like this quarter, I want to, or by the end of the year, I want to take a design thinking course and get my head around that. Well, in this quarter, I want to finish reading, Tim Brown's Change by Design book. Well, this month I want to do X. This week I need to sign up for the course. You just break it down, and break it down. Today I want to read 30 minutes of the book, right? What's the smallest step that moves me towards my goal, where I want to go? And then when you get here, I think that another tool I really encourage people to do is identify and establish 2 to 3 foundational behaviors. These are 2 to 3 activities you do every day that create environmental and practical clues and practices that take you where you want to go. For me, I wake up between 5 and 5:30 every morning. I don't think I've heard my alarm go off in a couple of years, but that's important for me. I've built that practice over time. And then I want to work out, an hour to 75 minutes every day. And I ride bikes. It's hard to do it unless you're on Peloton, hard to do a 30-minute bike. That's really good work. So I do about an hour or more. Those 2 things let me know, one, I've got space every morning to read, which is really important to me to further my development in that 5 a.m. wake up. And I've got time to exercise to make sure my health is attended. So when I get to the end of the day, I'm not having to chase any of those, feeling like I've fallen behind. But I've got those two foundational behaviors that really work for me, and I've built a habit over years of doing those. And so that's comfortable for me. It's a good routine. And then for you, it identify some things that were helpful for you. Thinking positive, not the stops, but the to-dos or the keep doings or the start doings. Maybe you want to only drink water. Maybe you want to read after the kids go to bed, or eat a clean diet, do yoga each morning, read scripture or meditate, run, practice guitar, spend 30 minutes one-on-one with one of your kids each day. Only check your phone starting at 7 a.m. Shut down work by 5:30 or 6 p.m. Whatever that goal is, what's that behavior or that environmental structure that says, here's a foundational behavior. If I live by it, it moves me further towards my goal. Jerry Seinfeld was asked once, how do you become a great comedian? He says, hey, I write jokes every day, and then I don't break the chain. Right? When you build that habit and do it every day, my goal is to keep checking it off that I did it every day. You build that habit, that chronic load, that fitness, that stamina that says I'm doing work that builds me towards my goals and where I want to go. And then finally, as we talk through all of that, I really encourage you to keep it simple as you work through this. You don't have to write a dissertation. What's your simple goal? What's your objective, your vision, maybe some of your values? What's your plan? What do you want to be at the end of the year? What's your quarterly objective with that? Monthly, weekly? What do I need to do today? And then what are my 2 to 3 foundational behaviors that are going to help me move towards that goal? Because when you take care of yourself, manage that self-talk, and manage your emotions, understand where you are, you set a plan for your future and where you want to go, and you know that it's not all day every day that you're working on that, but you're doing activities every day that move you where you want to be going. Then you've taken care of yourself, and you can equip yourself to now help those around you. Right? And Tony's going to walk a little bit through leaders and managers and how to care for those around you as you walk through having managed yourself, built a plan for yourself, and now serving those whom you work with.
Thanks, Adam. And I'll tell you that I first heard that comment of begin with the end in mind several years ago, and it has made an incredible difference in my life to be able to take a look at that end picture. And I'm a whole lot closer to that picture than you are. But being intentional, recognizing that every choice I make today is impacting that outcome that I envision down the road. So Those things that Adam has said are incredibly critical for you to pay attention to. But we've talked about taking care of yourself. But now what do you do to help those around you? And I want to specifically address those of you who are leading, managing other people right now, because I think right now it's pretty important that you pay a little bit of attention to that group around you, because doing what you've been doing in the past is probably a recipe for disaster. Leading the way you've led in the past, it may have been great. You're going to have to take on some different strategies. And so you may have been empathetic, but it's time to demonstrate greater empathy. 50% of the people in the Pew Research said they're truly concerned about contracting the virus. Now, you may not be concerned at all, but a whole lot of people are. And so it becomes critical that we become a little more empathetic and understanding of those who may be facing that challenge differently than even you are. Some have been impacted by it personally. They've had the disease themselves, or the flu, or the virus themselves. They've recovered. Some have actually lost loved ones as a result, and we may or may not know the impact. There's others who are experiencing their workplace differently, single parents who are trying to work from home, managing kids at school, working parents, no office space in their home, are just trying to figure out how to make this all work for them. So empathy is going to be critical. How can you put yourselves in their shoes and accommodate them in some way that makes their life manageable and helps make their work a little bit more effective? Promote associate wellness and well-being. What's one thing good, that 80% of people in the workplace said they're satisfied with the safety efforts of their company. People were, most of our organizations are doing a pretty good job of promoting safety around this whole thing. Some are frustrated by the extent of the safety efforts, feel constrained by them, but they recognize a whole lot of things are going on around safety. Another thing you can do is teach this whole area we're talking about to your associates. Teach them mindfulness, self-awareness, self-management, goal setting, looking to the long-term future. Those become pretty critical for associate well-being. Reiterate the mission and vision and values and purpose of your organization. What Adam was talking about as far as that long-term view was really living on purpose. And once we have a clear purpose, clear vision for our lives, it's easy to make decisions in our lives. Same thing with our organizations. With our organizations being disrupted the way they've been, it's easy for people to lose focus on the mission and purpose of the organization. So, right now would be a great time to reiterate how critical it is, the work that we do, how important it is to the lives of others. If you are in the sales cycle, as many of you are in the supplier community, it's easy to forget how important your role is to our society. And you work with a lot of people, you're actually providing materials that have been created in a manufacturing plant somewhere in your supply chain. And those people have been called now essential workers, which is interesting. We've been able to label people essential and non-essential in our society. But those folks that are essential workers are now part of the supply chain, and recognizing that their work has purpose and meaning. Otherwise, their work wouldn't be essential. Everybody's work is essential to someone, lest we forget. But one of the things I think is important too is prepare now for how you're going to respond when this whole thing is over. How you're going to respond to that 55% of the people who want to continue to work from home. What's your rationale going to be for your decision? What can you decide both legally, and you may have to get with your HR and your attorneys to find out what you can decide about those requests. What's gained or lost by working together or not working together. So how are you going to respond to those people? The last couple of things here, stay engaged. Remember that everything you do or don't do communicates. Paul Watzlawick said, one cannot not communicate. Everything is communication. So be very intentional about your communications. Build a plan for your communications. Don't let it just be spontaneous, because again, in the absence of clear communication, people make assumptions, and people need to know. They need to hear clear expectations. Otherwise, they're feeling a little bit adrift. They need to know how they're doing in meeting those expectations as well. So Setting up more developmental conversations is important. 25% say they're less satisfied with their jobs now than they were before. So it's pretty easy for people to feel undervalued. And if people feel undervalued, they're likely to start shopping and they're on the computer at home. So it's easy for them then to go to the computer, start looking for other work. And so, get those developmental conversations going, not only clear expectations, how they're doing, but another question people want to have answered is am I still doing the things that will help me get ahead in my organization? Or what does getting ahead in my organization look like now? And you may not have clear answers on that yet, but it's important to help your people understand that we're working on those answers, what this future organization looks like. So right now, we've said, take care of yourself first in a whole lot of different ways. Manage your emotions, manage your self-talk, what leads to those emotions, and live on purpose so that this 2021 doesn't just happen to you. At the end of 2021, you have been able to achieve exactly what you've envisioned for this 2021 and been able to adjust to the changes that are going on in the world around you. Adam, I think you got a couple of resources. In the meantime, Adam's going over these resources. If you have questions, feel free to put them in that Q&A box as well.
A couple of things, just some good books and an article to read here. The One Thing by Gary Keller, I referenced that in my part of the conversation. Atomic Habits by James Clear, just building habits. I think there's another book called Tiny Habits as well. But Clear does a great job just kind of walking through why habits are useful, but also some structure on how to build those in your own life. Essentialism by Greg McKeown. His is a little bit more of a kind of the idea behind priority and how that works. He and Gary Keller, theirs overlap a little bit, but all three really great reads. For leaders and then others in general, just good article, HBR, Harvard Business Review article, How to Lead When Your Team is Exhausted and You Are Too. It's a really good read. And then we've got a vision and foundational behaviors tool. If you're interested in that, it's just a worksheet to kind of get you thinking on that planning, longer term planning and thinking. Feel free to email me, adamhawk@resourcesforleading.com. We'll set up there. So I will go to Q&A here. We've got, where'd it go? Now I lost it. Sorry about that.
I got it, Adam.
Just
someone saying thank you. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
As well, it means a lot. Glad to be able to give support for you.
Any other questions or things we could be helpful with?
By the way, don't go this alone. If you're struggling with some things, reach out to someone to talk to, whether it's your colleagues or your boss, a coach, someone who can walk you through some things, because it is a different world. And being able to explore your options and figure out what to do next is really important. So don't go it alone. Recognize we are still connected. We still do need each other, even in a world that may be a little bit more disconnected today than we have been in the past. So Matt, I want to thank you for the opportunity to get to visit with your teams, your folks out here on the Supplier Community. Grateful for the opportunity.
Well, thank you both. And one of the things, before anyone drops off, one of the things I want to make sure is, you all have invested your entire careers in helping others in a variety of ways. And I just want to make sure that there is a means by which anyone who has an interest in any kind of a follow-up conversation or developing a relationship with the two of you, that would be outside Supplier Community, of course, but I would just really appreciate if you guys could provide your contact information. So anybody that just, needs help, needs coaching, needs help with anything that you all do, make it really easy for them to find you.
Okay. Well, Adam had on his slide, adam.hawk@resourcesforleading, and I'm at tony.hawk. So it's pretty easy to connect us. And by the way, I'm not that skateboarder, Tony Hawk. I know that you were all expecting to get on and see the skateboard guy. He and I did have a conversation. I tried to get some residuals out of that, but he did say you can be the original and he'll be the rich and famous, which has turned out to be true. I'm the original, he's the rich and famous.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, tony.hawk@resourcesforleading or adam.hawk@resourcesforleading. We'd be glad to provide some support for you. I think we're on your website as well. If someone wants to sign up for a time to visit with us, we'd be more than happy to spend some time with you.
Yeah, great. Guys, again, thank you so much. I appreciate you investing time to put this together and the time to spend with us. And like I said, I think I'm going to take this video, instead of making it available to Connect members only, I think we're going to put it out there for everybody. I don't think anybody would object to that. So I think it's a message that needs to get out there. So thank you all so much. I hope everyone has a great day.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.